For more analysis on this, I'm joined by Professor Graeme Samuel, the former head of the ACCC and the current chairman of Airlines for Australia and New Zealand. Graeme, thanks so much for your time. I mean, how important is this deal for Virgin and for the Aussie aviation sector more broadly?
Well, I'd have to say to you, looking at it from, well, obviously from the point of view of Virgin and Qatar, but also from the outside view of regulators, it's very difficult to find anything about this deal that you wouldn't like. It's terrific for Virgin because it gives it stability in its shareholding register. It gives it a bit of a launching pad for a potential IPO. It gives it strength and resilience for the future to be a strong competitor in both the domestic market, but also with the strategic partnership with Qatar into the international market. And so it all looks good. And I'd find great difficulty in understanding why any regulator would say this is not good for Australian aviation, domestic and international.
Yeah, it obviously needs to be approved by the Foreign Investment Review Board and by the ACCC. But what impact do you expect this could potentially have on competition? Could it result in lower airfares for Australians travelling overseas?
Well, I've always liked to think that competition is good for consumers in two respects. The first is it often results in lower prices and it should result in improved service. Now, we ought to remember that in terms of international airlines, we have about 37 of those operating in and out of Australia. So there is a fair degree of competition there. But what this will do is it will link up Virgin with its domestic arrangements and Qatar with its international arrangements. And I think as your introduction described, it's a rather cute way of Qatar getting a greater presence in international flights than it might have otherwise had. So it just introduced more competition, and more competition means that we have better service for consumers and we ought to have lower prices.
Yeah, and you sort of mentioned this a second ago, but having Qatar Airways come on as a cornerstone investor, buying 25% of Virgin, I mean, does that improve the outlook for Virgin and its planned potential listing on the stock market in the coming years?
You would have thought so. It would, because what it does is it provides a core shareholding that is stable. It potentially provides a stable base for moving into an IPO, which I think Virgin has been planning for some time, although we don't have a lot of information on that. So there's all those things that are in its favour. For FIRB, we've got to remember that Virgin is currently foreign owned by Bain, and so therefore it's moving part of that foreign ownership by Bain into different foreign ownership by Qatar. And it would very much surprise me if FIRB had a problem with this. But we never know how these things work. If you're looking at it from a competition viewpoint, I fail to see how there could be any concern on the part of the ACCC in terms of competition. In fact, this announcement today ought to have brought a smile to the face of Gina Cass-Gottlieb, in the sense that what it does is it encourages more competition on the domestic routes that are serviced by both Virgin and Qantas. It provides stability for Virgin into the future. It provides strength for it into the future. And that means that we'll have more vigorous and sustainable competition. And talking about sustainable, I see that Jane Hrdlicka, the current CEO, has indicated that this may well lead to further investment in sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. And that is equally important in terms of carbon and carbon emissions and climate change.
Yeah, do you think broadly competition is improving in the Australian market? Are customers getting more and more choice? I note, for example, Turkish Airlines is now launching new routes directly from Turkish to Australian shores later this year as well.
Yes, and look, as I said before, we've got 37, I think might even be 38 airlines that are operating internationally from and to Australia. So that's a pretty good base on which to operate. But look, more competition is better. We've always had, since the voluntary administration of Virgin, and then Bain's moving in, and Bain's are, if you like, a private equity. They're not. Private equity is not known for its long-term holding of shares, but Bain's has proved itself to be a longer-term holder of shares in Virgin than might otherwise have been expected. And so what we're seeing is a strengthening of Virgin, which is going to provide more competition for Qantas, and that's good. It's good for consumers. Consumers will now have a choice. They've always had a choice, but they know that they've got a certain choice, and particularly in the context of the uncertainty that has surrounded domestic aviation with the movement of Rex into voluntary administration and the collapse of Bonza. This provides sort of a clear certainty to consumers that we've now got two really strong domestic airlines operating in this country, and they'll provide some vigorous competition.
You mentioned Rex and Bonza. Earlier this year, another former chair of the ACCC, Alan Fells, singled out the Australian airport operators for their ability to supposedly overcharge airlines for services. Do airports have too much power in Australia?
It's probably one of those few occasions where I agree with Alan Fells. Airlines for Australia and New Zealand have been arguing this case now for so long it doesn't matter, I think 5 or 6 years. And we've been saying to the Productivity Commission and to the government and elsewhere that what you've got around Australia is a series of monopolists in terms of the airports. You don't have a choice. There's very little competition. Even Western Sydney probably won't provide a competition to Mascot and to Sydney Airport. And so what we have is monopolists who have the ability, as every monopolist does, to charge whatever they like to their customers. And that means not just airlines, but coffee outlets, food outlets, news agents, etc. So they've got that ability to do it.
We've run out of time. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.